with big hopes that this stream will be better than next one, that we had to stop it in the middle because some reason. Today, I'm very excited to host Nick Tune that I met in the DDD group in London, and Thomas Pierrain, I pronounce it right, Thomas Pierrain, that I met through a great article he wrote about how to incorporate authorization, and particularly fine-grained authorization with DDD. I let them introduce themselves soon, but before, a couple of announcements like every week. So first, everything is recorded. If you're here live, we're super happy that you're here, but don't be afraid. If you need to drop off, just drop off. You'll have the recording after on YouTube, and we'll share that on email. We also have time for Q&A at the end, but if you have any questions and comments, we always love to answer them live, because this is why we do live streams. So you can comment and we can answer. No matter where you watch us, could be YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, just drop a comment. We see that here and we will try to answer it live. Again, if you don't want to interrupt, just wait for the end. We'll keep some time for questions. Also, I'm very thankful for Permit that that sponsor this live stream every week and give me a chance to speak with people that I'm really appreciated and want to chat with them about challenges regarding security, authorization, whatever it is. With that said, let's start. So, Nick, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks for the invite. And secondly, thank you again for talking at our DDD London meetup recently. We had a speaker dropped out and the event was in crisis, but luckily we had a hero to jump in and do a talk at the last minute. And it was a great session. So thank you for that as well. A few words about me. Been a developer for around 15 years. Mostly positions like tech lead, principal engineer. I've done consulting for a few years, working with multiple companies at the same time, currently working as a staff engineer. And I'm also the author of a book called Architecture Modernization, which came out at the start of this year.
Mm-hmm. Great. So great to have you here, Thomas.
Hi, thanks for the invite too. My name is Thomas Pierrain. I'm currently VP of Engineering in a booming European scale-up named Agicap, and I'm a former entrepreneur, consultant, architect, extreme programmer also, which is obsessed by use case as opposed to the solution-driven architectures and approach. And I'm working in this industry for more than 26 years, something like that. And I'm also co-organizer of the DDD France meetup, domain-driven design FR. And I have lots of interest in that field.
Great. So good to have you here, Thomas. Now I know
Thanks.
to tell that better, but maybe it's better to say Thomas without trying to have a fake some accent. So we are going to talk about today domain-driven design and DDD and how it affects security. We're going to focus in security, but first, since you're both are strong part of the community, as you mentioned, I'll be happy to hear your perspective on just what is the definition of DDD. And let's start with you again, Nick.
Okay, sure. So if you talk to lots of different DDD people, you probably get lots of different answers. For me, I think I'm curious to hear Thomas' answer too. But for me, I think DDD is something we all do when we're building software. We have to think about the business we're working in and think about how we represent our business in the software to implement business functionality. So DDD is probably mostly around the application we build, the features we build, how to design the software for those features. And I would say domain-driven design in particular is putting a lot of effort into those things, trying our best to make the code match the business we're working in, putting a real focus on that. So if you look at some code bases, for example, if you look at the code and you look at how the business experts speak about the product, you'll see two different things. The code uses one set of words and languages, which might be very technical, and then your domain experts might use other words which you don't see in the code. So there's a disconnect. So I'd say it's a focus on that, how to create.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I just get a bit of. Can you hear that?
Yeah,
Is that noise
me
coming
too.
from me or?
No, no. I heard the same thing. There are some noises on the background here.
So maybe here I'm with noise cancellation. So maybe I can't hear. I'll mute myself when I'm not speaking.
It seems to be okay now. So yeah, just to finish, I would say DDD is about making your software resemble your business, and that involves developers and domain experts working closely together. And you can apply these ideas on an architectural level, how you split your application into different services or subdomains or bounded contexts, as DDD people call them, and also on a more tactical level, like individual lines of code. Can you read your code? And it's almost like a conversation you might have with experts in that domain. And I guess I'll hand over to Thomas for his definition.
Basically, for me, DDD is both an approach and a two-level toolbox. And the approach, you describe it properly, it's to focus on the important things on the business domain and things like that, and maybe with taking care of the language, and there will be a relationship with the coming topics, taking care of the domain and the language, and using the same language on tech side and business side for software to be aligned, fully aligned. And yes, that's focusing on the core domain and putting the right efforts on the right topic also. Sometimes you say we need to invest in that domain or subdomain. This is our secret sauce will have more impact. And sometimes for the accounting, maybe let's take a tool from the business and do not reinvent the wheel. So yes, approach. And I must assume that the approach interests me much more than the patterns. The patterns are interested, but the approach more and more interests me.
So it's interesting because I hear you both say it's before being like a practical or pragmatic way to write software is a way of thinking. It's not like it's more than just, okay, you should write classes or you should write functions. You need to think, and then there is, of course, a lot of way to implement, how to model domain, how to incorporate domains, use data streams, and a lot that you will get to that later. But Toma, I want to ask you, you're an engineering leader. You have a group, I think, of dozens or thousands engineers that you manage. And you're probably, you know, developers. They are happy because of engineering. They are happy because of languages, because of frameworks, because of Rust is very trending. I haven't met a developer who are excited because he's working for a bank or for, I don't know, community company. How do you convince developers to choose domain-driven design if they can choose go with the new trending functional language? And
Well, actually, in our case, we are well known
I just
for
tell them.
being loved in domain-driven design, and so it's helped us to gather lots of people that are really keen to understand the business, to understand the domain concerns, and also to practice the toolbox I was talking about. Because and especially in our case, it's the strategic. There's two-level toolbox, tactical patterns and strategical patterns. And the strategical part of the domain-driven design is really, it's one of our favorite things because we are doing lots of product management. And I must assume that it's maybe the best place I've seen in product management over the last decades. On my side, really the relationships between the product managers and the software developers are really intense. And so in other cases, when I was working elsewhere, my main thing was let's align our solution to the use cases, to the need, because otherwise, if we don't do that, let's say our solution will be there, tackling this problem, and the business is there, the business concerns and the objectives are there. So if we are not fully aligned like a tiny fish following a shark, ready to eat, and we will be less efficient in suggesting and proposing domain value to our customers, our users, etc. So yes,
So you said
alignment for better efficiency, I would say.
So you said, okay, fine, you can enjoy your engineering stuff, but if we'll start with making sure it adapt the business domain, you'll have more bandwidth to enjoy after. You say invest before to enjoy after. And I think that question, that thing about like enjoying after is led me to the next question. Should also small startups, small teams start with DDD, or is it something that belongs to large businesses with processes and stuff like that?
Nick, if you want to, or
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I found out as a consultant is a lot of companies that are becoming a scale up after they've been a successful startup haven't really put a lot of focus into their architecture. And now they're like, we want to scale the company. I guess like Thomas was talking about in the pre-chat earlier, not every company wants to do hyper growth, but people contact me and say, oh yeah, we've got some legacy systems. We used to be a startup. We want to grow the company, maybe go from like 20 developers to 100 or 200 in the next year or 2 years. And at that point, the architecture becomes a blocker because all the developers have just worked in the whole system and they've never really needed to modularize it. And I think it's okay to do that as a startup. I think it's okay for all of the developers to work in all parts of the system. But I think you still need to have some focus on modularity so that at some point in the future, when you do want to scale the company, your architecture is not a blocker. Of course, it's very subtle. You don't want to put too much effort up front when you're a startup into designing an amazing architecture. You know, I've heard about startups that start with Kubernetes and loads of microservices from day one, and maybe that's a bit too much. But I think having a bit of DDD expertise in your team and applying some of these ideas doesn't necessarily cost a lot of time and money, but can help you to keep things a bit more evolvable for the future. So I think the overall cost benefit is worth it, just not obsessing over all of the technical patterns and ideas.
maybe there is one thing that is relating to what we just said. I think one of the main drivers for Eric to create DDD, I'll let Nick confirm me, or it's autonomy. How to give autonomy to teams so that teams that are working and on a specific topic won't be slowed down by all the processes and all the other concerns, because when you are working in the bank, and Eric was working in the financing industry, the front office does not have the same constraint as the back office, etc., etc. So how can we make these people working clearly autonomously and be as much as possible efficiently on their topics? So thinking about the boundaries of all these people, the topics they are working on the relationships among them, reducing the coupling whenever it was possible, etc. So all the tactical and all the strategical patterns are somehow for that and help that way. And as I joined Agicap, it's a 7 years old company, something like that. I was surprised that they started to practice DDD really soon, and for them to have the software as much as possible aligned with the domain concern was a way to keep a good time to market over the years, and trying not to close some doors and being stuck at some time. So it's, for me, it's a real proof that it works also for startup. I was thinking about, I was a believer before joining them, and when I joined, I saw what they have achieved. And yes, the very first days was kind of very rough and prototyping and things like that. But very soon, the CTO, Luca Bertola, has just focused on that, and it's the key key reason of our success, I think, so far, 7 years
I
after.
think I think this vision of like thinking about how do I give new teams autonomous is a very like is a powerful business opportunity for startups, because I want to say at the beginning, I'm not doing R&D today. I'm doing DevRel. I have some developers in my team, but I mainly also focus on go-to-market and marketing. But I need now to hire a new developer advocate. And I know that even the noise that I'll get as soon as I will put this ad on LinkedIn will cost me a lot of focus. And that's before I need to take someone and put it, into our go-to-market rules and how we work and stuff like that. And if you say, okay, we are working DDD, all our software is whatever it needs to do, that's the way it module. Just understand the feature, understand the business requirement, you'll understand how to implement that. And if you need to open something new, then I think it's something very important. I also remember that I started in a startup that also that has that hyper growth, and I joined there as a technical leader. And they wrote in a Go language from the early days of Go language. And the code base was something that someone who haven't been with Go language since the early day of 2015 had nothing to do with, right? Because it was written by people who contributed back then to the Go language in itself. And they haven't developed an web API that is based on Go, right? But if it's everything on the business domain, then you can say, okay, I have a new business domain. I can, even in a monorepo or in a monolith, make it modular enough to be autonomous and to do not stack all my code as a legacy code. And I asked you earlier, Thomas, about how you convince developers. But I know, Nick, that you have a very good point to convince developers in that we need to modernize the architecture, right? And you wrote this book about architecture modernization. I think that's a great reason to convince people why do DDD. And I want to ask you, what is architecture modernization?
I think like DDD is something that everyone does in their career. We have software that was written years ago, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Spent some time talking to the Norwegian government, and they've got systems that are 40 years old. But at some point, these systems become a liability. We want to make changes, or their security risks, and we have to make some investment in fixing those systems. And in particular, I would say a lot of companies, the real focus of my book was a lot of companies are having a lot of legacy, and it's becoming a big problem for the business. And it's not just enough to say, let's do a bit of fixing the technical debt. It's like we've got a lot of legacy, which is making a big business impact, and we need to address it. So it's really, you don't necessarily have to modernize all of your legacy. As a business, you have to work out what's holding us back for what reasons, and then how do we balance fixing our legacy whilst continuing to function as a business. And a lot of the times, it's also about things like we want to scale the company, grow from X number of engineers to 1.5x or 2x the number, and the old legacy system's a blocker to that. So how do we get from the legacy to an architecture that's not blocking us and enables our teams to work independently, autonomously, etc.?
I think architecture modernization, as you describe, and you say legacy and 14 years, but is that
I said
about
40 decades.
Yeah. What language it was written in? Like
Good
COBOL
question.
and all this?
I don't know, actually. I never saw the code, but if you message me after the chat, I'll ask them. Or maybe they're watching. If you're watching, tell us in the chat.
Yeah. There is always a myth, like COBOL developers are the most high payers on like the development market. It's interesting. But what I want to ask, so you talk about years, but I know, Thomas, that you have this hyper growth. Do you think that modernization is something that depends only a year? Maybe modernization is something that we need to experience continuously. How do you look about modernization?
Yeah. For me, it's a continuous improvement process. It's not always possible because sometimes you join a context when it didn't happen so far. So you have a much important problem. But if you can do it smoothly, continuously, I think it's better. When I tried, we experienced some difficulties with one component over the last 3 years, and I was supposed to explain to the CIO also why we need to invest much more and mitigating and improving that situation. And I came up with a metaphor, which is a road network metaphor, trying to say that the code of our platform is like a state department where all the roads are either diverted, roadblock, you have to take a long detour in order to join your destination, or the roads are too small, the scalability will suffer, and we can't allow either our developers or end users taking that path, etc., etc., or they are full of speed bumps and things like that. So metaphors to express the sense that if we want to go towards our destinations, and for our customers also, we need to improve this network of state department roads. And this is what you call architecture modernization, refactoring sometimes, and things like that. So it's, if we don't do that, there is a avalanche. I don't know how to say that, but when the mountain is hurting people and roads, etc., and it will block us. So if we don't take that into account, our expansion, our growth will be blocked. And it's helped a lot for the discussions and because when you are scale up, you try to go fast every time. What the best path you can take, and sometimes you end up with some depths. So you need to clean your workspace again and again, otherwise you will be a bad situation. So
Yeah, and with this like continuous modernization, Nick, do you think there are like events or breakpoint that we can put and say, okay, we need to modernize this, we need to modernize that?
On a general level, it's difficult to give a general answer. I think everyone, maybe architects and people like staff engineers, principal engineers in particular, need to be looking at what's coming up in the business roadmap. Sometimes we need to be looking even 2 or 3 years ahead. It's always very difficult to do that. Sometimes businesses are changing their priorities every 2 weeks. So 3 years is a long time. But I think we need to be aware of what's coming up in the pipeline and look at what's going to be the effort of achieving that in our current system. And if the cost of doing that is too high, or it might not even be possible in lots of cases, then we need to try and present a business case and say, the current system we have won't allow us to implement this new functionality. So we're going to have to modernize it. Or it could be more for security concerns and say, this thing is so old now, it's on unsupported software, or it will be out of date in a year or 2 years. We really have to think about addressing this for reliability, security issues.
So it's always like a question of, let's say, cost effectiveness that can affect the decisions of modernization.
I think that's basically it. Yeah, it's working out what is the cost of doing something in our current system. Is that cost too high? Is it blocking us? And is it worth taking some short-term pain, as in we stop building features to make the system easier to evolve, and then we get some benefit in the long term? And I think that's the real challenge, really, because you're trying to tell someone, if you stop now, if you give up something now, you can have more in the future. And, we're always thinking what comes next and having to stop building features. It's always a very difficult task. So as Thomas said, having great metaphors really helps to try and help people who are not really in the software to understand the dynamics of what's going on here.
That's actually bring me a lot of thinking in something I wanted to discuss later. So mentioning it to remember later, but for the question of build versus buy that I wanted to discuss later from the DDD perspective. But for now, about modernization, Nick, I saw you some very insightful posts about what you call, or I think is a known pattern of anti-corruption layer. So besides of, it's very understandable from the name itself, what is anti-corruption layer and how it helps?
Well, it's another one of those DDD concepts that it's been around for a long time. It's been applied in different contexts, and maybe different people have different opinions of it. But the idea of the pattern is you have legacy and you want to build some new features, and you like to be able to build your new features in a way where the domain model of the legacy system doesn't influence your new feature. So you're going to build your new feature, and then you're going to build a translation layer between the new feature and the old one, or the new context and the legacy system. So that way, you can build a new domain model where you use different words and concepts like, I don't know, employee, for example. And in your legacy system, you might call it a worker, for example, and the attributes and the properties in the model might be different. So you have that translation layer in the middle, which allows you to have a nice new code base, which you can build exactly as you want to, and have that connect, translate to the legacy model, which is undesirable.
So it's like became like a new business domain of the anti-corruption layer, or it's something that integrate into the current design?
Well, when you look in practice, there are all kinds of anti-corruption layers out there. At Payfit at the moment, we were talking about this earlier today, the different variations we have. Sometimes it might be a simple translation. It could be just, less than 100 lines of code. In some cases, you might have to do data synchronization. And in some cases, your new model might be a completely different perspective to your old model. Maybe, for example, that you're expanding into new countries and you're taking something that was done before and making it a more of a generic and flexible model. And so the translation there can be more complex. And yeah, sometimes this anti-corruption layer can become almost like a domain itself. Obviously, what we want to achieve is to map between the new and the old as simple as possible. We don't want to create these massive anti-corruption layers, but sometimes you end up in that situation because either we knew we had to do that because it was the least painful option, or we weren't disciplined enough and we didn't refactor the legacy. So as we build new features in the new system, we have to do more mapping in the anti-corruption layer. Or it could be that we just didn't realize how much effort would be involved to map between these two things. It turned out to be more complex. You know how it goes, right? Oh yeah, well, just you're around a whiteboard, you have a legacy system is one bubble, the new system is the new bubble, this rectangle is the anti-corruption layer. Oh yeah, that will be like 20, 50 lines of code. It'll be like a couple of hours work, and then 3 years later, it's growing into like hundreds of lines of code.
Yeah. So I think that's a great way, to keep yourself aware. Sometimes it's something being conscious, then you can, make it works better. And I want to ask you, Tom, I know that you're a very security savvy developer and engineering leader. Do you think that ACL or other patterns like that can help us with security compatibility when we're modernizing software?
How I was thinking about that recently, but I didn't have a crisp answer. For sure, anti-corruption layer are like the bread and butter when you are thinking about your system, modularizing some monoliths before splitting or keeping them together, because the promise, the promise of Eric of having people that stay autonomous without being jeopardized by breaking changes from the other side of the room, etc. But in terms of security, maybe it's like a net. An anti-corruption layer is like a net, something that protects you somehow. I think there is maybe a relationship with that, but I didn't think much more about that relationship with the security.
I could offer a few words here if you like. So
I always like.
Yeah, something I've seen is with the legacy system, sometimes you get these like big entities, like a big customer or a product, and you have like API endpoints or bits of your code where it's like you can update the whole thing. And you might have a mix of like personal information details, someone's address, and then you've got like their payment details. And it's like when someone's updating the address, you don't really want them to have the chance to update the payment details because you're combining an operation that touches sensitive data and maybe like super sensitive data. And so with an anti-corruption layer, you can define more constrained endpoints. Like you can say, here's an endpoint to update the personal information. and here's an endpoint to update maybe the payment details, but one consumer doesn't have access to the whole thing. So you can kind of, like Thomas was saying with the net, you can add more constraints on that legacy model and make things a bit more granular or more fine-grained access, I would say. So not everyone has access to the whole database anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I actually plan to ask something very similar to that. But beforehand, since we started to talk about security, and this live stream should be about security, I want to ask if you think from your perspective about DDD, and again, I really be happy to hear the answer from both of you. Do you think security should be a business domain at some point? I'll start with Nick because we ended.
It's a tough question. I wouldn't say I'm a security expert, so my answer might not be the most optimal here. But I think in terms of, is it a domain? Not really. I think security is something that touches the whole system, and there might be multiple domains which are about security. Depending on the domain, the business industry you're working in, you might have different domains which are security focused, like fraud checking, for example, might be a domain based around security. So I would say usually we don't just have one security domain where all the security is. It's something that's affecting different parts of the system in different ways. Maybe Thomas can add more on top of that.
Yeah, there is a case. There is still the case where you are working on a sec company, and where it will be your own domain. So maybe for Gabriel and people like you, it will be your core domain. But aside from that, I think security, as you said, is much more a transversal concern. For sure, one can consider subdomains or even bonnet context, like such as the IAM, I for identity management, and IAM for access management, as bonnet context. But maybe for identity management, it may work, but for the access management, it won't be enough because the access management part is not really bounded. I mean, to make it work, one must have to check permissions in every service, in every bonnet context, and in relationship with your every bonnet context and every subdomains and things like that. So it's like AOP, aspect-oriented programming. You need to weave security checks all over the place. So it's less bounded, I would say, in that case. But it should be taken into account in all bounded contexts, I think.
Yeah, I think
Complex question.
it's very interesting answer, and especially because you mentioned this net that you need to build, and I want to connect these 2 points. So you say, and you also split between identity management and access management, which is also interesting because in the old IT world, they usually were connected. So like identity access management is a huge business domain even. It's something that many people are familiar with, but you say, no, the identity domain that might have its own maybe business for some companies, and there is the access management. And I read your article, and in your article you stated that relationship-based access control and fine-grained authorization are the most compatible permission and access model for domain-driven design. Why?
For sure, for many reasons, but mainly for the expressiveness of the solution. Expressiveness and low impedance mismatch. It means that, maybe we take that into the right order. RBAC, relationship access-based access control,
Relation-based
is
access
something.
control.
Yeah, it's something where you think about relationships among stuff, and you create relationships. And when you check if someone has a relationship with a concept, for instance, a fine grain capability, if you ask the system, and if the system find a path between these people or this actor and this fine grain things, and there is a relationship. Okay, you can open, you can enter. It's fine. You have the credential. So the expressiveness is because it's very low ceremony model. It's basically YAML stuff. In the solution that we are using, which is OpenFGA, Reback open source solution, you express your model with strings, and the relationships are really strings. So you can really embed the ubiquitous language of your bounded context, your various bounded context, and take that directly into your what we our model, our access management model. So it's the reason why it's really low impedance mismatch. And when you ask for checking permission into your code, let's say part of one API, when asking for.
I think we lost.
Okay.
Yeah, we lost you for a second.
Okay, sorry. So
Yeah,
when you integrate a check in behind the API endpoint or things like that, you just express the fine grain things. So far, my experience of access management system were different paradigm, like role-based access control, and people were ending up creating administrators. And okay, you can set that Thomas is an administrator regarding that bounded context or that use cases or that part of the software. But after that, the translation of what does mean an administrator was part of the code. And there were lots of limitation related to that. And having centralized systems allowing really crisp expressivity and domain-driven align vocabulary, etc., without keywords related to the security is really simplifies lots of discussions. Even with the product managers, you translate complicated stuff that you want to implement into simple sentences, and so it's really one of the reasons. Of course, you can build role-based access management from a relationship-based. It's also modularizable and composable and versatile approach. So you can build other blocks with that, but mainly the fine grain allows you to you don't take shortcuts. You express directly in the code the very specific fine grain check that you want, and it works. So you don't have to translate into roles that you need to interpret after in the second. And yes, so.
So when you mention like the fine grained and the expressiveness, I can think on two sides of expressiveness. One, the and you do like the check function. You call the check function clear if you keep the fine grained and not ask if the user has a role, so something like that, and if the user does not has it, but you just express the I don't know, no matter the convention, but let's say subject action resource, and then anyway, and then you can keep that like a net that is everywhere has the same enforcement. But there is also the other side where you actually configure the policy when you configure what a relationship are allowed to do. The decision. I know is specifically.
I don't think. Nick, can you hear Gabriel?
No, he's breaking up a bit.
Yeah.
I'm having the same issue, yeah.
Okay. Maybe while Gabriel is joining the network, I will try to answer the question I understood, and you will tell me if breaking. Okay. With fine grain, you can authorization. It's really fine for specific use cases, etc. But what is really powerful in the relationship access control management is that you can have transitive relationships. And one can end up by allowing me to do action, not because I have the exact specific fine-grained things, but because as another relationship that I have, maybe I'm a cost center manager, I can express within the domain and the model that all cost managers are able to see all the expenses related to my cost management, cost center, sorry, I think like that. So you don't have to click on in the user interface to give to provide Thomas this topic, this right, this right, this right. There is a kind of factoring. You can leverage on transitivity to give and to remove access to a wide range of people at the central level. So it means that if you realize that something that must have been done very quickly, you can act at one place and automatically all your systems, all your money context will take that into account. Unless you are using caching and things like that, but usually the solution we are using prevent us from the need of building that. We lost Gabriel. But,
I guess we could talk about some of the other topics we thought we might talk about today. So if you have any other follow-ups on that, we could go there, or we could talk about how...
No,
go
I'm
ahead.
here back.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they have
You're back as the host.
There's a lot of
thing
flag
that Thomas mentioned, and I think this kind of... Am I corrupted again? No, I'm
You're
good.
good.
So you did it again, Thomas. I think this classic of like centralized configuration and decentralized expressiveness for enforcement is something that is super powerful, and I think we maybe can take it as an example or as an abstract way on how we should aware for the security domain. How about instead of having it as a business domain, have the centralized configuration as something that we know it exists, could be by maybe or external tool, and the decentralized will be expressiveness. So I can take that to many approaches. And I want to get to you, Nick. I remember in the video that we did there in the NDC, we came to this discussion of build versus buy. And this discussion happened a lot with fine-grained authorization. Of course, build is not necessarily, buy is not necessarily pay some SaaS money. Also could be, with open source tools like on Policy Agent and OpenFGA. But you think DDD prioritize buy of security on top of build?
I think if you look through a domain-driven design lens at how to make this decision, we have the concept of core domains, supporting domains, and generic domains. And so from the perspective of DDD, we would ask the question, what industry are you working in, and how does security fit into the picture? I imagine for lots of companies, we would get to the point that security is not your differentiating feature. It's not something your company can do better than others, and therefore it would be a generic subdomain, and that would imply we probably should be buying this.
Yeah.
Avoid not invented here syndrome at all cost with security concern. That would be.
When you say non-invented here, I love this term. I actually saw that first in your blog, but I used that before knowing that's a term. Do you think not invented here is about concepts and design patterns, or also about tools?
Yeah, also about tools. For me, it's a wider bias, I would say. But to be honest, before such kind of modern access management solutions, we didn't have a lot of options when it comes to do access management as developers. So we may be able to build a mix between a tools role-based tools and to enrich it locally within database, within our boonet context or API, etc., to have fine-grained parts. Now, which is really a good news, is we have product, open source product also, that supports fine-grain as a bread and butter. So it's changed a lot. But it's maybe a challenge because people like me working in this industry since over the years may have difficulties to change. It's a change management issue because people like to change, they don't like to be changed, basically. And so when people took times over the years to build their own library, their own way of creating their own table for the access management, and they are comfortable with that. And one situation that happened that very often they implement the access management check within the same data stores are their domain, concept, etc., etc. When you are using a reback control system, for instance, you will be confronted to eventual consistency issues. So it may be an extra step that, I don't want to check that. I will say begin transaction. I create my domain object, and then I set the proper credential, and then I commit. So problem solved, and that's it. But there are other problems that you have when you are doing your own access management solution. So, but depends for people when you are trying, when you don't are able to explain them why you are joining such centralized solutions, etc. It may be seen as a you ask me to add eventual consistencies, lots of corner cases for something that I used to implement it in really quickly because over the years I kept my script and my way of thinking. It may be a serious change management issue. It may be one of the challenges you will face when you go through these solutions.
I think particularly in this point, one of the challenges with DDD is, using like event-driven design system. I know that DDD is very influenced to choose event-driven design system because the way that you want to model. What is the, I'll ask Nick because I know he's talking about, he's not deep into security. Always say that, but then answer a very detailed answer. What do you think the right security lookup on event-driven system?
So if we're talking about an event-driven architecture, we have different parts of our system that are communicating via events, which are usually asynchronous. So what might be some of the security concerns here? I think firstly, if we have a lot of events flying around over the network, we may be making our data more vulnerable than if it was all stored in one database inside one large system. So I think access to the events is obviously a crucial concern. If we have all these systems publishing all these events, how do we ensure that we've got visibility and they're not ending up in the right place? And so I think this is really where platforms are effective and platform thinking. We build standardized libraries so that when a service is publishing events, it has security baked into it, for example, so that teams have out of the box the recommended approaches for publishing and consuming events, for example. So I would really say, yeah, thinking about platforms and baking conventions in.
Thomas, you also implemented the fine-grained access control and reback into event-driven system. You mentioned eventual consistency, and I know it's very interesting because I know you're using OpenFGA, and OpenFGA is very, not always by default, but very strong consistency. How do you feel about integrating a fine-grained authorization and a fine-grained access control into event-driven systems?
The main challenge is to keep the token of the users. When you are doing some event-driven architecture, you may end up with the asynchronous stuff and some workers that are listeners waiting in the shadow, ready to work and ready to complete some business processes and things like that. So you have the challenge of just keeping sometimes of keeping the context of the user initiating the request. And so you need to have solutions for that. But apart from that, we are using lots of EDA because lots of people, especially maybe in France, are really conflating DDD with EDA. And so every time you speak about domain-driven design in France, almost immediately you have EDA solutions coming out of it. So we are using extensively that, and no, it does not make problems or issues. It works quite well.
Actually, consider myself in EDD. Like I saw the names together.
I think we lost him again. I don't know how to say much more relating to the EDA things related to security, I guess. But
I think the way you design your events is quite interesting. Again, what kind of data do you put together? Like you could, for example, if you do event-driven architecture naively, you can create what's called CRUD events. So
yeah.
you might have, for example, user created or user changed, and that user changed event might contain lots of information, and some of it might be less secure. Could be like personal detail, financial details, for example, and you might have their name, and you might have less sensitive information. So I think from a security perspective, by analyzing your domain and looking at your different use cases, you might design events that are more probably more fine-grained than these big CRUD events. And by being more fine-grained, you can probably isolate data that has greater security concerns from others. And probably that goes all the way to the boundaries of your systems by analyzing your business use cases. The way you shape your system with finer grained events that might allow you to have different bounded contexts or different microservices where you can encapsulate security concerns easier. Whereas if you have those big events, that might lead you towards bigger services that are combining data that has different security requirements.
That's a fact, but I think about something else, which is there are some kind of anti-patterns where you can publish too many events, like providing your private events from one systems and publishing them just in case someone will have some interest about that. So when you are doing that and you are not designing your events for consumers and people that need them, you will have less information about the kind of information you want to protect or you want to keep, or about the visibility of the event. So I think it's a challenging granularity to tackle with. And on my side, thinking about events, public events, public events, events that I want to share with other contexts, with other teams, etc. I'm thinking more and more about if there is an expectation from someone else, let's design these events for them instead of letting them having the temporal coupling and lots of too many fine-grained events to deal with, and maybe not being able to interpret the proper time for them to act or to react or doing such things. But I didn't thought so far about the security issue. I think your point is really interesting, Nick, about that. It will
I
make
totally
you
agree
think.
with your point there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think don't just make all your events public so anyone can access them. By keeping some of your events private inside a service or inside a context, firstly, it gives you more flexibility to evolve them. And if you're building a platform, for example, you can provide the developers with libraries that allow them to differentiate between private and public events. And therefore, naturally, you can say, these are private events. You've got your private event storage mechanism. Those should not be accessible to other domains by default. So yeah, and I think you're right, by analyzing the business use cases, you don't want to go too fine-grained. By understanding what the other domains need, you can design things that will be less, you're not guessing what people need and making things more flexible. You're giving only exactly what's needed.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I really love the fine-grained events. That's a really good one. We need to write about it, like fine-grained authorization of fine-grained events. I think also one of the benefits of fine-grained authorization is the ability to actually authorize smaller subset of data, not only like authorize the single piece of data, but authorize subsets of data, especially with graph that let you traverse and really return and read or do the very particular subset that you need. We left the last 5 minutes. I have personal keep it for the last minute. We have question for the crowd. So Thomas is asking, for a noob to DDD, this was a great talk. Thank you, Thomas. Now for the question, Nichtune with the PS1, what's the best PS1 game?
The best PS1 game is Gran Turismo, and the best PS5 game is Gran Turismo 7.
That's so good. Nick, do you know that in the last event that we sponsored, we gave in a raffle PS1, 2 PS1. That was super cool. People were super enjoy from that. So kudos for the PS1. Another question also from Thomas, also for someone out of college. What are good resources to become more rounded in this space? It wasn't part of my computer science degree.
For about DDD or security?
I guess DDD. Security is today part of every computer
I mean,
science
there are
degree.
many books that are interested in, but I would not recommend people to start with Eric Evans' books because it may be hard to read and to grasp, etc. He won't say that, but the book from Nick and Scott Miet was one of my favorite books as an introduction for people. Whenever I was in front of people that I wanted to discover, I was pushing this book into their hand, and it was really one of the best introduction according to me about that. And then there are
There's also warm recommendation on Nick Talks. He always deliver great talks that you super enjoy. And just sorry, Nick, for making you here. But I mean, he can stand on the stage for 1 hour, and every minute will be interesting from as he started just now. So highly recommend on any Nick Talk that you can find on YouTube. He's a stage artist. And now to the audience, if you have any kind of questions or thing that you want to ask, just leave a comment. We'll see that here. And I want to ask a question. Maybe I actually wrong. But for me, it seems like DDD is super popular in Europe. There are groups in every city. There are the DDD Europe. There are also some groups I saw in Australia. But I think it's much less popular in the US. Why is that? Or am I wrong?
No, I think you're right.
Why?
According to people such as Eric, Paul Rayner also, and a lot of people in the US, I don't know if there is a relationship about legacy in Europe. I think we try to foster a lot more on our legacy systems. And I very often, when I was working in the financing industry, we had a branch in New York and Chicago and stuff like that. And tech people that I was working with were much more about let's do it again and again, and rebuilding with a new technological stack. Let's replace this. I don't know if there is a relationship with that. But
yeah,
maybe Nick, you travel much more than me.
Yeah.
The US.
So probably maybe cultural differences. Nick, do you also think that's correct? And you have maybe any insight on it?
I'm not sure if it's cultural differences. I think there are communities all around the world into DDD. I know people in the States who are quite into it as well. I think
Really?
just not enough people with the same mindset came together to make a community. I know people that have tried, but there are pockets like Pierrain is in Denver with Explore DDD. I know people in Virginia, for example. So
Maybe it's a community thing. Maybe the way that people creating communities and collaborate in Europe is different than in the US, and that lead.
I'm not an
Maybe.
expert in culture, so yeah, I don't know what to
Yeah.
say. Yeah, I'll avoid that tricky
Great. So
topic.
another recommendation, there is a book of I can't remember her name now, but she's a doctor in SID called The Culture Map. If you're working in a remote first company, that's a great book. So Erin Myers, she's a professor in INSEAD, and The Culture Map is super fascinating book that will teach you a little about behaving in a multicultural environment. And with that, I really want to thank you. And that was a fascinating discussion. I really enjoyed. I learned a lot about DDD and about security. And see you soon and talk soon.